Got a suitcase full of memories, tattered and torn. Walking these dusty streets with shoes so worn. A bayou breeze whispers tales in my ear. The call of Tarpon Springs is pulling me near. Back to Tarpon Springs, where the bayous hum, where the sunset melts like old golden rum. The air sings songs only my heart understands. Gotta get back home to that Florida sand.
History is more than words on a page or photos in an archive. It's the story of real people, real places, and real lives. In portions of this documentary, we will use the power of artificial intelligence to bring history to life. Through enhanced historical images, we can step closer to the people who shaped this town, see the streets they walked, and experience the vibrant life of a community built on culture, resilience, and tradition. From its early days, Tarpon Springs was nicknamed the Venice of the South. It certainly earned the moniker by early developers who capitalized on the romantic charm of its majestic waterways. Tarpon Springs is a city rich in history and charm. Known for its Greek heritage and sponge industry, it offers a slice of the Mediterranean in central Florida. Today we will explore the remarkable founding and early history of Tarpon Springs, Florida. Chapter 1. Early Settlers. Long before the city of Tarpon Springs was established, the land it would occupy was shaped by thousands of years of natural history and human habitation. The region, with its network of bayous, the Anclote River, and proximity to the Gulf of Mexico, was an ideal location for early life. Archaeological evidence suggests that indigenous peoples, likely part of the Tocobaga, lived along the waterways long before Spanish explorers arrived in the 1500s. These early inhabitants relied on the abundant fish, shellfish, and wildlife of the region, leaving behind mounds of oyster shells and other artifacts. However, it would not be until after the Civil War that the Tarpon Springs area would be settled. In 1876, A.W. Ormond and his daughter Mary decided to move to the Upper Pinellas Peninsula. Upon their arrival, they cleared land and constructed a small cabin. It was located near the present-day intersection of Martin Luther King Jr. Drive and Pinellas Avenue. A year later, Bahamian-born Joshua Boyer arrived in the area from Key West. He happened upon the Ormond residence and decided to stay in the region and establish a homestead. It wasn't long until Joshua and Mary fell in love and married in April 1877. Joshua Boyer credited his wife Mary for naming the new settlement in honor of the great number of tarpon fish that frequent the spring bayou in those days. The Boyer cottage was built originally as a bit of a honeymoon getaway. This 14 by 14 foot structure featured board and batten siding and a high-peaked cedar shake roof. The small cottage has been preserved for viewing at the Pinellas Heritage Village in Largo. In 1880, the state of Florida was in severe financial distress after bad railroad investments and Civil War debts. However, a single financial transaction would reshape the entire future of the Florida peninsula. Hamilton Diston, an industrialist from Philadelphia, purchased 4 million acres of Florida land from the state government. This purchase, the largest private land acquisition in U.S. history, was designed to drain much of Florida's swamplands and promote development. This massive investment saved the state from economic collapse, while also setting off a real estate and development boom that would last for decades. His land purchase included Tarpon Springs, making him one of the most influential figures in the town's early history. Recognizing the area's natural beauty and economic potential, Diston saw Tarpon Springs as an ideal resort location. He established the Lake Butler Villa Company and granted it 9,500 acres to develop. Diston would call upon Anson P.K. Safford to become president of the company. Originally from Philadelphia, Safford was a former governor of the Arizona Territory from 1869 to 1877. He was also a close friend of Hamilton Diston and was highly respected. His leadership skills and reputation gave credibility to the company and attracted investors and settlers. The governor purchased a beautiful lot on Spring Bayou to construct his home. The Safford house originally stood along the banks of Spring Bayou. Its large open verandas offered sweeping views of the water and a front row seat to the town's early development. Soledad Bonilla Safford, born in 1860 in Mexico, was the wife of Anson Safford and relocated to Tarpon Springs in 1882. She played a pivotal role in establishing the town's first Catholic chapel and school. She was also instrumental in founding the Women's Town Improvement Society in the early 1890s, which later became the Tarpon Springs Women's Club. Governor Safford's sister, Dr. Mary Safford, would also accompany them in their new home. Dr. Mary Jane Safford was a nurse, physician, educator, suffragette, and humanitarian. During the Civil War, she earned the nickname as the Angel of Cairo for her compassionate care of Union soldiers in Cairo, Illinois. After the war, she became one of the first female obstetricians in the U.S., notably performing the first ovariotomy by a woman. Safford also taught at Boston University School of Medicine and was among the first women elected to the Boston School Committee. Her arrival in Tarpon Springs was a blessing as she acted as a town physician, making her Florida's first female physician. Governor Safford became one of Tarpon Springs' leading citizens, and his influence was felt in a variety of ways. He built the first schoolhouse and donated land for several churches. However, in a tragic turn of events, in December of 1891, both Anson Safford and his sister Mary would die just days apart, likely due to complications from influenza and pneumonia. It was a tragic blow to the entire community. During the late 19th century, Florida was heavily marketed as a health destination for those suffering from respiratory illnesses, particularly tuberculosis. Often marketing to invalids in newspapers and magazines of the time, many believed that the mild climate, fresh air, and mineral springs had healing properties. Tarpon Springs, with its spring-fed bayou, fit perfectly into this image. However, as medical science progressed and treatment options expanded, the trend of sending invalids to Florida would largely die off in the early 20th century. Chapter 2. The Rise of the Sponge Industry. In the mid-1800s, it was discovered that vast sponge beds existed just off the coast of Tarpon Springs in the shallow waters of the Gulf. During the 1880s and 1890s, vast fleets of sponge-hooking boats swarmed the Gulf waters near Tarpon Springs to pluck up these treasures. Fishermen used long poles with hooks to pull sponges from the sea floor. To spot the sponges, they looked through a glass-bottomed viewing bucket known as a water glass. They would then use 20 to 40-foot poles with hooks on the end to retrieve the sponges. Natural sponges were considered incredibly valuable because they were versatile, durable, and gentle compared to many man-made materials available at the time. Their uses spanned personal hygiene, household cleaning, medicine, crafts, and large variety of industrial applications. John K. Cheney was a businessman and friend of Hamilton Diston from Philadelphia, who arrived in Tarpon Springs in the late 1870s. Cheney quickly recognized the economic potential of the natural sponge beds in the Gulf of Mexico just offshore. By the 1880s, he established the Anclote and Rock Island Sponge Company, becoming one of the first people to commercialize sponge harvesting in the area. Using the traditional hooking method from small boats, Cheney hired local fishermen, many of them black and Bahamian, to collect sponges manually. Locally, there were two early centers of the sponge industry. Just north of the Anclote River was Bailey's Bluff. The other was located near present-day Harbor Watch and was simply known as the Sponge Harbor. Chapter 3. A Town Takes Shape. In the 1880s, Tarpon Springs began its transition into a resort town, catering to wealthy northern visitors who sought the warm climate and picturesque landscape. Several hotels were built to accommodate this influx of tourists to the city. At the heart of this early boom stood the original Tarpon Hotel, a grand structure built around 1883 by the Lake Butler Villa Company. It would become one of the city's first and finest accommodations, a striking three-story building adorned with wide verandas on three sides, offering guests shaded views of the surrounding natural beauty. Prominently positioned on a parcel of land near Spring Bayou, it quickly became a hub of social and civic activity in the fledgling town. Unfortunately, the hotel's prominence came to an abrupt end on the night of November 30th, 1898, when a devastating fire destroyed it entirely. The Tropical Hotel, later renamed the Ferns, was one of Tarpon Springs' earliest and most beloved landmarks. Originally a bunkhouse for workers known as the Longhouse, it evolved into a proper hotel under the care of Amelia Mother Meares. The Ferns offered guests a scenic and tranquil retreat. More than just an innkeeper, Mother Meares turned the hotel into a vibrant social hub, a place where locals and visitors alike gathered for conversation, comfort, and community. She also played a significant role in the care and preservation of City Park, which sat directly across from the hotel. She acted as an unofficial caretaker of the park, personally tending to the grounds, planted flowers, and ensured it remained a clean, welcoming space for townspeople and visitors. Upon the death of Mother Meares, the Ferns closed its doors. Today, a Spartan gas station sits in its place. In the mid-20th century, City Park was converted into a parking lot for the downtown. The lost park left behind only a few clues of its existence. A vase, plaque, and mosaic dedicated to Mother Meares exist today. The Stratford Hotel, originally known as the Madeley Hotel, was a prominent three-story establishment located at the corner of Tarpon Avenue and Gross Avenue. Constructed around 1915, the Stratford offered clean, practical lodging, ideal for middle-class travelers, seasonal visitors, and locals. Over the years, the building underwent various changes but was ultimately torn down in the 60s. More modest accommodations also existed. A great example was Hotel Kalimni that functioned as a boarding house for single spongers while in port. The Home Within offered affordable lodging and was located just a block south of downtown. Villa Plumosa was a cozy guesthouse-style hotel surrounded by greenery. It offered a quiet retreat for seasonal visitors, known for its Victorian charm and wraparound porches. Like many such hotels, it was family-run and located near the more scenic, walkable parts of town. After the sudden death of Anson Safford, his widow sold their prime lot to Mr. George Clemson. There he constructed the city's largest mansion. The Safford House was moved a block to the north to its present location. After Safford's passing, his widow, Soledad Bonillas de Safford, transformed the residence into a boarding house named Villa Ansonia. Subsequently, following her marriage to Salvador F. Martin, the establishment was renamed the Miramar. In later years, the home was subdivided into smaller apartments. A significant milestone occurred on February 12, 1887, when it was officially incorporated as a city. The town had just 52 residents at the time. However, Tarpon Springs was not just attracting investors and tourists, it was also developing into a maritime and commercial hub. That same year, in 1887, a lighthouse was built on Anclote Quay, an essential structure for guiding ships safely through the shallow waters of the Gulf. This was a key moment in the town's economic development, as it allowed for safer navigation and increased trade. Homes and businesses sprouted up along the city's vast waterfront. Romanticized by early tourism promoters, the name reflected both the town's natural beauty and its vibrant maritime culture. The city dock on Spring Bayou was once the central hub of transportation and commerce in early Tarpon Springs. Built to serve the growing waterfront community, the dock was a busy point of arrival and departure for goods, visitors, and residents alike. Large steamers like the Governor Safford ran regular routes between Cedar Key, Tampa, and Tarpon Springs. But due to the shallow waters of the Anclote River, they couldn't navigate all the way into town. Instead, passengers and cargo would be transferred to a smaller steamer, the Mary Diston, which was better suited for the narrow, shallow stretch leading into the city dock in Spring Bayou. The arrival of the Orange Belt Railway in Tarpon Springs in 1887 was a transformative moment in the town's history. A depot was constructed in downtown that would connect Tarpon Springs with the nation's railroad network. With the railroad came a wave of growth and prosperity. Local industries like citrus farming, lumber, and eventually the sponge trade flourished with access to larger markets. Tourists and settlers began arriving in greater numbers, spurring the construction of hotels, homes, and businesses. The Orange Belt Railroad was built by Russian immigrant Peter Demens. The narrow-gauge railroad stretched from Sanford to St. Petersburg, the city he named in after of his hometown in Russia. The railroad played a crucial role in the development of new towns and communities on the Pinellas Peninsula. The Orange Belt Railway struggled financially from its inception. The company was stuck under a mountain of debt. Demens was forced to sell by 1883. The track would be converted to standard gauge and integrated into the plant rail system. The original train depot built in 1887 burned to the ground in the 1908 downtown fire. The replacement depot was constructed in 1909 and still stands today. The train station has been converted for use by the Tarpon Springs Area Historical Society and Museum. The Tarpon Springs Tourist Club was a major social and cultural institution for the city's winter visitors during the early to mid-20th century. The Tourist Club wasn't just a place to gather, it was a hub of social life. It offered lectures, dances, card games, luncheons, community sings, plays, and even educational talks. For many visitors, especially those staying for several months, it gave structure and a sense of belonging. Chapter 4. Early setbacks. Unfortunately, Tarpon Springs suffered two major early fires that devastated its downtown business district in 1892 and again in 1908. The town had limited firefighting equipment at the time, and with wooden buildings built close together, the fire spread rapidly. Afterward, there was a stronger push for modernized fire codes, better equipment, and wider streets, which influenced how the town would be rebuilt. At the same time, local law enforcement was struggling to maintain order. Tarpon Springs was still a frontier town much like those in the West. It would play host to one of the most notorious feuds in Florida history. The Whitehurst-Whidden-Stevenson feud was one of the most explosive and deadly personal vendettas in Florida's frontier era, an all-out blood feud that turned parts of Tarpon Springs and Pasco County into battlegrounds during the 1890s. It began in 1893 when Tarpon Springs Marshal William Whitehurst was gunned down while trying to arrest a drunken sponge fisherman. The alleged shooters, Constantine Bud Stevenson and John McNeil, were arrested and tried. But after a mistrial and retrial, Stevenson walked free, infuriating Whitehurst's allies and setting off a chain of revenge killings. What followed was a storm of ambushes, masked raids, courtroom drama, and cold-blooded murders stretching across several years. Families chose sides, juries were swayed by fear or loyalty, and justice became a matter of survival. Hammocks turned into deathbeds as men were gunned down in their sleep. Others were shot through open windows, ambushed in fields, or assassinated while working alongside their children. By the late 1890s, newspapers were breathlessly tracking the body count and speculating whether the law could bring the carnage to an end. Though the violence eventually subsided, the feud left a lasting mark on the region. Chapter 5. Sponge Capital of the World. In the early 1900s, Greek immigrant John Kokoris had experience in the sponge industry trade and understood the value of deep-water diving techniques already in use in the Mediterranean. At that time, John K. Cheney was one of the leading figures in the sponge industry in Tarpon Springs. He owned sponge warehouses, boats, and a small army of spongers, but still relied on inefficient hooking methods. In 1905, Kokoris approached Cheney with a bold proposition that would forever transform the sponge industry. Kokoris argued that by leveraging existing diving technology and Greek know-how, they could dominate sponging the Gulf. Diving in deeper water would vastly increase the harvest and quality of sponges. Cheney was convinced and backed Kokoris's plan. This partnership sparked the mass migration of Greek workers to Tarpon Springs, forever changing the city's cultural, economic, and religious fabric. The first 500 Greek divers arrived in Tarpon Springs in 1905. Within a year, Tarpon Springs would become the leading sponge port in the United States. With the growth of the sponge industry came the expansion of the sponge docks. The commercialization brought hundreds of sponge boats at its height. It also brought with it the establishment of the Sponge Exchange in 1907. It served as a centralized marketplace where sponge divers and dealers could sell, auction, and distribute their sponge harvests. Prior to its creation, sponge sales were informal, which led to inconsistent prices and limited oversight. The formation of the exchange introduced structure, regulation, and competitive bidding, bringing greater economic stability and fairness to the booming sponge industry. The exchange featured open-air stalls and storage space where sponges were cleaned, sorted by quality and size, and prepared for sale. Buyers from across the US and even Europe would travel to Tarpon Springs to attend auctions and purchase the prized natural sponges. At its height, the sponge exchange was a vital part of the local economy and a symbol of the Greek-American community's central role in making Tarpon Springs the sponge capital of the world. However, with the growth of the sponge industry came competition. This competition arrived in the form of Key West sponges in 1907. The so-called sponge wars weren't just metaphorical, they involved real violence, especially off the coasts of Tarpon Springs and Key West. Tensions between Greek deep-sea divers and traditional Key West hookboat fishermen, many Bahamian or Cuban, boiled over into dangerous, sometimes deadly confrontations. Greek boats entering sponge-rich areas long claimed by hookboats sparked fights, vessel rammings, sponge theft, sabotage, and even gunfire. Armed men sometimes waited at docks to confront rival crews. At the heart of the conflict was more than economics. It was cultural resentment. Greek divers were new, foreign, and highly successful, seen by locals as outsiders threatening their livelihood. In response, state and federal authorities introduced new laws, designated harvesting zones, licensing systems, and increased marine patrols to reduce conflict and regulate the multi-million-dollar sponge industry. The 1953 movie, Beneath the 12-Mile Reef, filmed in Tarpon and starring Robert Wagner, offered a dramatized depiction of the sponge wars. Chapter 6: The Greek Experience. Shortly after the first Greek divers arrived in town in 1905, many of their families would later follow. While the Greek men braved dangerous underwater conditions, their women maintained homes, raised families, and supported small businesses that lined the docks along Dodecanese Boulevard. Within a generation, the Greek community had established itself as the cultural and economic heartbeat of the city, founding restaurants, bakeries, import shops, and the original St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church. Built in 1907, it was a wood-frame structure which seated about 150 and was named for the patron saint of ships and seafaring men. They would eventually outgrow this original building and would open the existing church in the 1940s. Many in the Greek immigrant community cooked traditional dishes from their homeland. One man's name would go on to become synonymous with Greek dining. Louis Pappas immigrated to Tarpon Springs from Greece. Before opening his iconic restaurant in the 1920s, Pappas served as a mess sergeant in the US Army during the First World War. During his service, he was stationed in France and eventually became the personal chef to General John J. Pershing, the commanding general of the American Expeditionary Forces. His most legendary creation, the Greek salad, began as a hearty meal for soldiers, layered with potatoes, beets, anchovies, and a signature potato salad base. After the war, it was later refined and popularized in his Tarpon Springs restaurant, known as the Riverside Cafe, which became a landmark in its own right. Perhaps no event better symbolizes the Greek community's presence than the annual Epiphany celebration, held every January 6th. This ritual marks the baptism of Jesus in the Jordan River. In Tarpon Springs, it takes the form of a dramatic and sacred spectacle. Dozens of young Greek boys dive into the chilly waters of Spring Bayou, competing to retrieve a white wooden cross thrown by the Archbishop. The boy who finds the cross is said to receive a year of blessings, and the moment is filled with emotion, pride, and community reverence. After the dive, the city comes alive with the Glendy, a traditional Greek festival held at Craig Park. With music, dancing, food, and fellowship, the Glendy transforms the solemnity of the religious ritual into a joyful celebration of culture. Greek folk dancers perform in costume, local families prepare and serve homemade dishes like souvlaki and baklava, and the smell of grilled lamb fills the air. It's a day when the entire city, locals and tourists alike, gathers to experience the spirit, history, and identity of Tarpon Springs' Greek heritage. Chapter 7: The African American Experience. African Americans were among the earliest settlers of Tarpon Springs, with roots going back to the Reconstruction era. Their labor powered the town, hauling and cleaning sponges, working in citrus groves, doing roadwork and carpentry, and cooking in homes and restaurants. African Americans were among the first spongers in Tarpon Springs using the traditional hooking method. With the arrival of Greek divers and advanced diving techniques, the sponge industry underwent significant changes. Many African American spongers transitioned to working on Greek boats, often serving as crew members and in some cases divers. This collaboration led to a unique cultural exchange, with African American workers learning Greek and gaining acceptance. Black women found work mostly as maids, nannies, or laundry workers in white households. Most lived east and south of Pinellas Avenue, Alt 19, confined there by both custom and legal segregation. Oral histories describe a reality where African Americans knew not to be seen west of Pinellas Avenue after dark. While race relations were generally peaceful, just like any southern city in the Jim Crow South, Tarpon Springs had its share of racially fueled incidents. This was particularly true during the 1920s, when racial tensions were at a boiling point across the United States. Blacks attempting to exercise their right to vote did so at some risk. Encouraging other African Americans to register to vote was incredibly risky. E.J.M. Saunders found this out when he was kidnapped and brought to the woods north of town. There he was stripped of his clothing and flogged 30 times with a leather strap. His assailants left him to stumble many miles back to town. Despite being excluded from many aspects of civic life, the black community created its own rich world. They built churches like original Mount Moriah African Methodist Church that existed on Alternate 19. Their community ran their own barbershops and small grocery stores, and sent their children to Union Academy, which was established as a school for black students living in Tarpon Springs. A World War I surplus building would serve as their schoolhouse. However, during this period, segregation of the races existed even in death. Tarpon Springs was home to two cemeteries closely located near each other on the east side of town. Cicadia Cemetery buried the dead from the white community. Across the street was Rose Cemetery, a historically African American burial ground. While the black community in Tarpon Springs was often overlooked and underfunded, they were full of resilience, faith, and community pride. In 1917, the United States entered World War I. During the war, natural sponges were in high demand by the military for medical and naval use, especially for cleaning equipment, surgical applications, and use aboard ships. Patriotism ran high during the Great War. Despite having a large immigrant population, many young men enlisted to protect their new homeland. Residents joined Liberty Bond drives and Red Cross efforts to support the troops abroad. During the war, as the U.S. Shipping Board ramped up vessel production to support overseas logistics, small Gulf Coast shipyards, including those in Tarpon Springs, were enlisted to assist. The Department of the Navy awarded local firms with $200,000 in contracts to construct seagoing barges. The various congregations held religious services to pray for their boys in France and to honor those who never returned. In the final months of the war, the 1918 influenza pandemic hit Tarpon Springs hard. Like many towns across the country, schools and churches were closed, and health workers cared for the sick at home due to limited medical facilities. Despite these challenges, Tarpon Springs remained resilient, and the post-war period saw the sponge industry and the town's economy bounce back quickly heading into the 1920s. Chapter 8 Around Town. There are a number of families that made up the backbone of early Tarpon Springs. These names ring familiar to residents. These are names like Noblit, Tarapani, Gauss, Vinson, Mears, Fernald, Boyer, and Cadwalder. Many of these families made up a large part of the city's early commercial interests. Most of the buildings constructed after the 1908 city fire still stand today. During the early period of Tarpon Springs, the downtown was the beating heart of commerce in the city. There are several early businesses to mention. The Vinson department store was a handsome two-story building with large plate glass windows showing off the latest fashions, linens, and housewares. Inside, polished wooden floors creaked underfoot as shoppers browsed shelves stocked with bolts of fabric, men's hats, and canned goods. The Vinson family also established a funeral home in the early 20th century. The funeral home served residents of all backgrounds and played a central role in community life. Its long-standing presence made it part of the fabric of downtown and a quiet witness to the city's evolving history. Nearby, the Mears building housed Mears Drugstore, which had become a local institution. Its soda fountain was a favorite gathering place for teenagers and tourists alike. Also on the first floor was the Royal Theatre Movie House. It showed silent films and talkies alike and was a popular attraction. The second story contained the Hotel Mears. The building itself was built by Ernest Mears, who was a prominent businessman in the sponge industry and was the son of Mother Mears. In 1912, the Factless department store and shoe repair opened its door for business. The business gradually grew to include family clothing and orthopedic products. It has served as one of the longest continually run businesses in the city, as it is still open until this day. The Fernald Howell hardware store supplied a wide variety of tools and equipment. It supplied everything from marine supplies to fencing wire and was often the first stop for any handyman or contractor in town. The streets outside were lined with hitching posts, early Model T Fords, and bicycles as Tarpon Avenue was full of life and promise. The decade of the 1890s was known for the construction of the Golden Crescent, a sweeping arc of elegant homes and boathouses that lined the western shore of Spring Bayou in Tarpon Springs. This enclave became a symbol of the town's rising prominence as a winter retreat for America's elite. Several wealthy families from the north, lured by the mild climate and serene beauty of the bayou, built grand Victorian-style homes adorned with gingerbread trim, wraparound porches, and stained glass windows. The Golden Crescent also featured elaborate boathouses designed not just for function but for show, offering shelter for their lavish yachts and serving as gathering spots for afternoon teas and social outings on the water. The Tarpon Inn, constructed in 1912, once stood as the crown jewel of Tarpon Springs' hospitality scene. Set dramatically along the banks of Spring Bayou, the inn offered guests sweeping views of Tarpon's beautiful waterways. Built in a style that blended colonial revival elegance with resort-style comfort, the structure featured ornate woodwork, wraparound porches, a grand central staircase, and a large formal dining room. It quickly became the preferred winter residence for wealthy northerners escaping the cold, as well as a social hub for local events. Tragically, in 1927, a fire, likely originating in the kitchen, engulfed the wooden structure and reduced it to ashes within hours. Despite its prominence and elegance, the Tarpon Inn was never rebuilt. Its destruction coincided with the end of Florida's housing boom. It marked the end of the Grand Hotel era and coincided with changing tourism trends and new lodging options. Though gone, the inn remains one of Tarpon Springs' most iconic lost landmarks. The semi-permanent residents of Tarpon Springs' Golden Crescent played a significant role in shaping the cultural and civic life of the city. They contributed to the town's early institutions, donated to churches and schools, and helped fund infrastructure projects that would support the growing community. Their presence helped elevate Tarpon Springs' reputation as a desirable destination for both leisure and investment. Many of their stately cottages, carefully preserved and restored, still stand to this day, offering a glimpse into the Gilded Age opulence and the foundational years of one of Florida's most unique towns. Among the many winter residents who left their mark on Tarpon Springs, George Innes Jr. might have been one of the most noteworthy. George Innes Jr. was a prominent American painter best known for his landscapes, portraits, and religious works. The son of famed landscape artist George Innes Sr., he carried on his father's artistic legacy while developing his own classical and detailed style. While his father briefly visited Tarpon Springs late in life and painted scenes of Spring Bayou, it was George Jr. who built a lasting relationship with the community. He built his winter estate, Camp Comfort, along the Anclote River, where he found inspiration in the natural surroundings and serenity of the Florida wilderness. Innes became a generous benefactor to the Unitarian Universalist Church, where he designed the altar and donated several of his paintings. His presence and contributions helped establish Tarpon Springs as an early center of art, culture, and quiet reflection. In general, full-time residents of Tarpon Springs had a relationship with winter visitors that was a mix of appreciation, dependence, and occasional resentment. Tarpon Springs was a town perfectly situated for outdoor recreation. On Sundays, families would dress in their finest and walk to the edge of the water to see and be seen. Wealthier residents living in the stately homes along Grand Boulevard or around Orange Street might host small tea gatherings on their verandas, overlooking the bayou. The water was at the center of most recreation. Rowing contests and sailing were part of daily life for many. The Tarpon Springs Yacht Club organized friendly competitions and leisure cruises. Rowing contests were held on Spring Bayou, especially on the 4th of July, and during local water festivals held in the mid-1920s. Picnics on the Anclote River were quite popular at the time. They built campfires, fished, and even broke into impromptu musical performances. Residents and seasonal visitors alike found plenty of opportunities for connection and celebration. The town's emerging civic identity was supported by organizations such as the Freemasons, the Odd Fellows, and early women's clubs. Marshall H. Allworth was a prominent figure in the iron ore and lumber industries of northern Minnesota. Seeking a winter retreat, Allworth chose Tarpon Springs, Florida for its favorable climate and scenic beauty. Known for his luxurious yacht, which was a familiar sight in the waters around the Anclote River and the Gulf waters. His passion for golf led him to establish a private 9-hole golf course on what was then considered the outskirts of town. In 1912, Allworth leased his course to the city of Tarpon Springs. By 1924, the city issued a $50,000 bond to purchase the land and officially acquire the course. This course underwent renovations and expansion to 18 holes that are largely the same as they are today. Allworth was also heavily involved in the development of Sunset Hills Country Club, developed during the Florida land boom of the 1920s. Construction began in 1924. The club officially opened on December 15, 1926. Sunset Hills was built not just for golf, but to become the centerpiece of a new upscale neighborhood. Ads at the time sold the dream of Florida living: lush greens, sea breezes, and high society. However, the timing was terrible. The Florida real estate bubble burst just months after the club opened. Within a few years, the Great Depression hit hard, and many of the development dreams crumbled. The property saw various uses in subsequent years, including serving as a year-round baseball school and later operating as the Upham House Hotel in the late 1940s. In 1953, it became part of the Anclote Psychiatric Center, known as Anclote Manor. The Tarpon Springs City Hall, constructed in 1912, was a proud and prominent civic structure that reflected the town's early 20th century ambitions and growing identity. Located on Pinellas Avenue, the building was designed in the neoclassical revival style, a popular architectural choice for government buildings during that era. Inside, the building housed the mayor's office, city clerk, and city council chamber. It served as the administrative heart of the city. The city hospital today, known as Advent Health, North Pinellas, was originally constructed and opened in 1927 as Tarpon Springs Memorial Hospital. It was built on city-owned land with funding from a $25,000 bond issue and initially featured a 2-story structure housing 12 beds. The city had been in desperate need of a larger schoolhouse for some time. In 1912, a new brick school building was constructed at the intersection of Pine Street, Ring Avenue, and Orange Street, serving grades 1 through 12. This facility featured 7 classrooms, a library, a chemistry lab, and even an auditorium. By 1922, the growing student population necessitated the construction of a separate high school building. This new structure, located at 324 East Pine Street, was designed in the Mediterranean Revival style with Beaux-Arts elements. At this point, most roadways in town needed to be upgraded. Most were dirt or made up of crushed seashells. With the Florida land boom, Tarpon Springs saw a push toward modernization. Some downtown streets were paved with brick or asphalt. A particular focus was given to Tarpon Avenue and Pinellas Avenue. Chapter 9, The Roaring Twenties. Florida in the 1920s became one of the most desirable destinations in America, thanks to a perfect storm of climate, marketing, and modern convenience. With the rise of the automobile and expanding rail lines, the once remote peninsula was suddenly accessible. Developers and speculators flooded the state with advertisements promising paradise, year-round sunshine, sandy beaches, and easy riches. No state income tax and cheap land sealed the deal. For many, Florida represented a new frontier for leisure and investment. In Tarpon Springs, the decade brought a wave of energy. The sponge diving industry was at its peak, and the town became a blend of working waterfront and high society escape. Tourism flourished as more visitors arrived by rail, car, and steamer. Pinellas Avenue was beginning to rapidly develop as part of the commercial core of downtown Tarpon Springs during the 1920s. With the loss of the Tarpon Hotel years before, the city was ready for a new high-end hotel that would face Pinellas Avenue. This would arrive in 1924 with the construction of the Arcade Hotel. Designed in the Mediterranean Revival style, the two-story structure featured stucco walls and decorative architectural elements typical of the Florida boom period. The building included both retail space and hotel accommodations under one roof. While no longer a hotel, today it hosts shops, offices, and restaurants. While the postcards and newspaper articles portrayed Tarpon Springs as an idyllic place, the city was not without its problems. The 1921 Tampa Bay hurricane, also known as the Tarpon Springs Hurricane, made landfall on October 25, 1921, as a Category 3 storm with winds around 115 miles per hour. It brought a 10 to 12-foot storm surge, flooding much of city, sinking boats, and destroying waterfront buildings. Nearby, Tampa, St. Petersburg, and Clearwater also suffered major flooding and wind damage. Despite its power, casualties were low, due in part to early warnings. It remains the last major hurricane to directly strike the Tampa Bay area and serves as a stark reminder of the region's vulnerability. The 1920s ushered in the Prohibition era with the 18th Amendment and Volstead Act banning alcohol nationwide. Florida, in particular, became a hotbed of illicit activity during this time. The state's extensive coastline and proximity to liquor sources like the Caribbean earned it a notorious reputation for rum running and bootlegging. Tarpon Springs, a small port town on Florida's Gulf Coast, was no exception. In fact, Tarpon Springs was described as made to order for bootleggers, with its dense forests, numerous coastal inlets. Tarpon Springs saw two main sources of illicit alcohol during Prohibition: locally distilled liquor and smuggled imports. In the pine woods and marshes outside town, clandestine stills turned out moonshine whiskey and homebrew beer for the local market. Once the liquor, whether locally distilled or smuggled, reached Tarpon Springs, it found its way to consumers through an array of speakeasies and bootleg joints. A major raid in late 1929 dramatically confirmed the extent of Tarpon Springs' speakeasy network. 14 federal prohibition agents, accompanied by the Pinellas County Sheriff, swooped down on 12 different liquor outlets in a single day. They seized significant quantities of alcohol. The raid resulted in 7 arrests, comprising 4 American and 3 Greek Tarpon Springs residents, underscoring that the illegal liquor trade crossed social and ethnic lines in the community. Most of the captured booze was destroyed on the spot by agents. Tom Craig served as mayor of Tarpon Springs and was the namesake of Craig Park. When he spoke about what the town was like when he was a boy in 1920s, he had a few interesting tales. "We had a lot of really rough people here, and I mean rough. Tarpon Springs used to be called Murder Incorporated. There was lots of smuggling around here and feuding families. The Ku Klux Klan was revived in 1924. In regard to Town Marshal Reuben Jones, Craig said he'd warn people the first time they broke the law, and the next time he'd just shoot them." Deputy Barney Anderson decided to run for marshal against Reuben Jones. One evening on his way home, Anderson was shot and killed on the walkway near Spring Bayou, an act for which Craig's sisters witnessed. At the trial, Jones convinced the judge that Anderson had threatened him and that he was shot in self-defense. He was released. Reuben Jones won the election and continued to be marshal until he retired around 1920. In August 1921, Jones was on a fishing trip in Hernando County. As his car drove down the sandy side road, he was ambushed by gunmen wielding shotguns. They pumped Jones and his passenger with buckshot at nearly point-blank range. Newspapers reported that the retired marshal's body was full of 50 slugs. His killers were never identified. However, Jones had made many enemies during his reign as town marshal. In 1926, Patrolman Everett Bluefield was approached by a citizen regarding a suspicious vehicle parked behind a grocery store. As Bluefield and the citizen walked up to the car, 2 men exited the store. One of them immediately opened fire, fatally wounding Patrolman Bluefield in the chest. In 1931, the city experienced what may have been one of the most notorious murders. Dr. Archie McAllister was gunned down on the steps of the hospital. The assailants were said to be known by many, but no one was ever arrested in connection with the doctor's murder despite the hefty rewards offered. It became one of the most notorious cold cases of its time. Once final events worth mentioning occurred. In late November 1932, a harrowing incident unfolded in Cedar Key, Florida, involving 3 Greek sponge divers from Tarpon Springs, Stathis Iohannou, Theodore Samarkos, and George Georgiou. Caught in a Gulf storm, they sought refuge in Cedar Key's harbor. Upon arrival, they faced hostility from local authorities, particularly the Justice of the Peace, who was prejudiced against Greek immigrants. After going ashore, the divers visited a local bar and befriended a woman, reportedly the mistress of the Justice of the Peace. This interaction incited anger among some local men, leading to the divers' arrest on charges of drunkenness and disorderly conduct. While in custody, one diver was stabbed to death, and the jail was subsequently set on fire, resulting in the deaths of the remaining 2 men. Investigations revealed that the Justice of the Peace and his associates were responsible for the arson, motivated by personal jealousy and deep-seated prejudice. While Tarpon Springs had many beautiful waterways, it had limited public beach access. City officials were keen on providing this as many nearby towns had constructed beaches of their own. However, it wouldn't be as easy as trucking sand over to the shoreline in western Tarpon. The shoreline was made up of marshlands, mangroves, and tidal flats known for being exceptionally shallow during low tide. But if they constructed a dredged island offshore, the city could then build a beach where the water was deeper and more consistent. It could also create a controlled space for swimming, fishing, and boat access. The municipal pier would be created as a dredge and fill project. The city built up a small gulf front island and causeway by pumping sand and sediment from nearby waters. This ambitious project was part of a broader effort to provide residents and winter visitors with access to the Gulf, as well as to compete with nearby cities that were developing their own public beaches. At the heart of the new beach, a community hall designed for dances, concerts, community gatherings, and holiday celebrations. Known as Pleasure Pier, it was a favorite place for young people in the town to socialize. In the mid-1920s, Tarpon Springs found itself on the national sports map when the St. Louis Browns of the American League chose the town as their spring training home. Local businesses welcomed the influx of visitors, sports writers, players, and curious fans alike, who came to catch a glimpse of big league action in their own backyard. The team stayed at the Stratford Hotel during spring training. At the heart of this brief but memorable chapter was the team's manager and star player, George Sisler, one of the finest hitters of his era and a future Hall of Famer. Known for his grace on the field and his quiet intensity, Sisler had batted an astonishing .420 in 1922 and was American League MVP. In a show of respect and reverence, the city would name their spring training facility as Sisler Field, a name which it still bears a century later. Though the Browns were never a dominant team in the American League, their presence in Tarpon Springs had lasting effects. It inspired local interest in baseball, and even prompted the formation of youth leagues. Ultimately, the Browns would relocate to West Palm Beach after just 3 seasons in Tarpon. For decades, the St. Louis Browns were overshadowed by the crosstown rival Cardinals that dominated the National League. In 1953, the team was sold and relocated to Baltimore. The team was officially renamed the Orioles for the 1954 season. In 1939, George Sisler was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. He held an astonishing .340 career batting average and a 257-hit season in 1920 that was only broken by Ichiro Suzuki in 2004. It may have only lasted for a few golden seasons during the mid-1920s, but for that short time, Tarpon Springs wasn't just a sponge diving village or a winter retreat. It was a springtime home to big league baseball. By the time the Great Depression hit, Tarpon Springs had already lived a lifetime. In just 50 years, this once remote corner of Florida had grown into something remarkable. A town shaped by water, built by hard work, and carried forward by a blend of cultures. Immigrants from Greece, African-American pioneers, and northern winter residents all helped carve out a city unlike any other. One defined not by sameness, but by the convergence of many worlds. They brought their languages, their customs, their hopes, and together they wove a community that was fiercely proud of its heritage. There were struggles, failures, and bumps in the road, yet through it all, Tarpon Springs endured. As the city grappled with the challenges of the economic depression, it did so with the weight of history behind it and the strength of its people ahead of it. This was not the end of the story, but the close of a chapter. A chapter that defined what Tarpon Springs was and hinted at what it might yet become.
The gator's eyes glimmer in the swamp's soft glow. The Mississippi sent me here, now I can't let go. Magnolia sweet, but it's salt I crave. Tarpon Springs bottle me in its way. Back to Tarpon Springs, where the bayous hum, where the sunset melts like old golden rum. The air sings songs only my heart understands. Gotta get back home to that Florida sand. Cypress trees standing tall with Spanish moss remind me how far I've wandered and the cost. But every stride hums of hope, not despair. Tarpon's waiting, I'll breathe that sea air. The sponge docks they call, where the sponge divers roam. Their echo reminds me of a home not alone. Oh, Tarpon Springs, your bayous they sing. Take me now to your warm, healing spring.